we are joined by Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former Indian ambassador, who has served in Beijing as well, and Professor Swaran Singh, who is with the School of International Studies in JNU. I welcome you both to News 9. In China, we dealt with considering its belligerence in the South China Sea, which is only increasing with time.
Uh, I think it is interesting to see that this increasing belligerence, as you mentioned, of China is not limited to any one of the neighbors. This is entire periphery which has faced such a increasing belligerence of China, whether it is India or it is Japan, and we are currently talking of Taiwan. So both the triggers of China's behavior and also implications of what China does has to be seen in regional terms. And I think the biggest lacune that I notice, which has perhaps encouraged China's constant power projections, is that you just mentioned 5 others have also claims on South China Sea. 4 of them are part of ASEAN, Association for Southeast Asian Nations. We have not seen collective ASEAN response to China's increasing power projections in the region. And therefore, China is able to perhaps sort of browbeat countries individually. And what we are noticing recently is that it's a constant fatigue which China is inflicting upon Taiwanese armed forces. So it may not necessarily launch an attack. Indeed, if you look at how China has evolved in terms of its approach to Taiwan, the first leader, Chairman Mao, used to talk about in liberation of Taiwan. Second leader, Deng Xiaoping, said integration of Taiwan. Third and fourth leader, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, talked of winning hearts and minds. But now the reassertion of China and the new leader, Xi Jinping, is talking of a seizure of Taiwan being inevitable. So the language over period has changed, and same is Taiwan.
Yes.
Whenever it is the DPP, which is Democratic Progressive Party in power, which is now Tsai Ing-wen is from that party from 2016 and now again from 2020. It talks about being independent and then pursuing independence. But then when you had 2008 to 2016 Kuomintang, which is KMT, which is you had leader called Ma Ying-jeou, then it subsides and it starts building bridges with China. So both domestic politics on both sides and the regional politics at the larger level is determining what kind of China's equations will be against one or the other neighbor. And therefore, if we only analyze in terms of bilateral equations of Taiwan and China, I think we are missing the wood for trees in that sense. We are missing the entire process which is building China. And therefore, whatever happens with any of the neighbors, whether it is India or it is Taiwan or it is Japan, is aimed at increasing China's regional preponderance in that sense, power projection, and it has very different implications. And that should make all the periphery come together. At least ASEAN definitely could come together and speak in one voice. And potentially, perhaps India can also contribute in making sure that entire periphery begins to speak in one voice.
Yes.
The way India has stood up in last 1 year against China has perhaps inspired some response in the periphery. But ASEAN is at the center, and I think if ASEAN doesn't stand together and sort of stand up to China, then individually countries, and of course you mentioned example of Philippines, where even after winning that arbitration, Philippines President Duterte said, I don't care about the arbitration as long as I can get investments from China. So that's a very strange behavior which has emboldened China to constantly do these things. And China is constantly going to only, increase these power projections. China is not a country which will openly invade any of the neighbors because it knows the costs are going to be extremely high. So it's only going to constantly stress the neighboring countries and sort of maybe create certain mode of even paranoia in the neighboring countries that China is unstoppable. And this is, I think, increasingly the time when we notice China's kind of overtures vis-a-vis any of these countries, and now Taiwan is in sort of debate right now. There is need to have a collective say at the regional level because all these countries are facing this increasing belligerence, as you said, of China. And there is no other way. There is no other way to stop China. And then, of course, it also begins a comparison between democratic models versus the authoritarian models. And China's increasing preponderance is undermining democratic traditions and democratic models. We see what has happened in Hong Kong, which is another experiment of democracy. and potentially things could change in Taiwan. Imagining that KMT comes to power again, in 2024, and the equation between Beijing and Taipei begin to change, this could have deeper implications for the very value systems which have sustained international community so far in terms of stability and security for the region. So those deeper implications and sort of repercussions perhaps need to be understood, and that should make entire periphery to stand together and sort of treat this as one shared challenge which is facing them. To some extent, United States will come and sort of play a certain role, but United States is a faraway country. They'll be guided by their own interests. They would be perhaps looking at selling weapons to these countries, etc., and drive their own sort of influence in the region militarily. But onus primarily lies in these countries. I think that stand in periphery of
Yes.
China, that they must stand together. And I think India, being the largest and most powerful in the periphery, is expected to play a certain role in getting all of them together to stand up to China.
Absolutely. Ambassador Swaran Singh, if you could come in on this, that we've heard the UK Foreign Secretary say that they welcome an AUKUS-like security alliance that they've had with the US as well as with Australia, but they would like such alliances with other countries as well. And she named India, Japan, as well as Canada. Do you see AUKUS as well as Quad, and there's no link between the two as of now? One is a military alliance and the other is looking at global good, so to say, in the region with socio-economic development. But are these groupings providing some balance or restoring some balance uh, in the wake of China's belligerence in the region?
There is no doubt, other than having the entire periphery come together, these are multifaceted initiatives like Quadrilateral Security Framework and now AUKUS, which is Australia, UK, and US. And you would remember that President Donald Trump had also revamped the Five Eyes, which is where Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the US, and UK again come together in terms of intelligence network, keeping an eye on what China is doing. So there are multiple initiatives that are happening, but we should also notice how you mentioned AUKUS. Soon after returning from United States, Scott Morrison has been simply defending himself. He's gone to the extent of saying China is welcome to join the Quad and that this is not a military alliance. That shows, as Ambassador just mentioned, the kind of deep pockets advantage that China carries with each of these nations. So even if sometimes they come together and take an initiative, being very, very concerned about their shared China challenge, individually, each of them starts immediately backtracking on what they have already committed. So Australia is a clear example of damage limitation effort where they're trying to deal with the so-called wolf warriors of Beijing by making sure that this is not really seen the way world is now advertising. The whole media of the world said it is a military alliance. Then you saw prime ministers of India and Japan celebrating and complimenting United States to start AUKUS instead of seeing Quad and AUKUS being sort of undermining each other. They said they are going to complement each other. Now, with so much of advertisement and focus on AUKUS, obviously Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, felt that he needs to sort of protect his country against Chinese anger or angst or anxiety leading to, again, certain kind of harsh behavior. So individually, countries still backtrack because they have enormous dependence, as Ambassador mentioned, on China's economic leverages.
Yes, but it's a different ball game when different countries come together and have such understandings. That's all the time that we have for this. Professor Swaran Singh and Ambassador Wadhwa, thank you so much for having joined us with your views in Newsnight tonight.